this evening's in our series Voices, our series Faith in the Fire. There are fewer this evening, but I know that the quality is good, the quantity. So welcome to everybody on a very cold night. Maybe that's what our problem is, unless some people are sitting listening to a talk about food in Islington by mistake. There's a talk about food in Islington going on in the chapel at the same time.
I was talking about food. I thought the gentleman downstairs said, "Are you going to talk or for food?" Well, I said, "Well, I'm going to talk, but the food sounds appealing." He made it sound like they're actually giving food.
That's good. But it's lovely that everybody's here, and thank you all for being here. And a special thanks to Nazek and Shanon for coming and joining us, and contributing to our, I think, quite careful deliberations during this Lent period. When we're trying to think about the big challenges that face people of faith in the contemporary world, and they are huge questions that we have to look at and talk about and think about. And just a summary of what we've been doing so far. We've began by listening to a talk about religious persecution throughout the world with some very interesting observations on how people of faith are experiencing discrimination and exploitation, and not so much the high-level, well-known examples of persecution, but also how people of particular faiths find themselves in a lower social status in society, and therefore are more vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, which was extremely interesting to hear that analysis. Very thoughtful. And I think one of the things that stood out to me was when I said that the real danger that the issue of religious persecution is seen as a right-wing issue. And her response was, that is because the left are silent on it. And that I think was really quite something to ponder about. And then last week we had a very, very powerful evening where three people who are engaged, if you like, in really frontline issues of refugees and asylum seekers, of climate justice, of racial justice, and justice for LGBTQ communities, really just sharing their stories and their experiences in a very personal way. And that was really incredibly inspiring. At the same time, we've been, in our Tuesday study sessions, been looking at what the word solidarity means from a Christian perspective, and really exploring some things in depth. So if you haven't been joining us, do join us on the Zoom meeting on Tuesday evenings. And we've also, I think, perhaps unexpectedly, but also been confronted quite a bit over the last few weeks with the issues of Christian fundamentalism and Christian extremism, which perhaps needs more examination once this Lent period is underway. But this evening, this is typical of our open space evenings. We have two speakers who will share their thoughts with us, and we have some music. Welcome back, Jengen Hussain, who stunned us last time he was here, and that will stun us again. And the whole idea of these evenings is that we have some intellectual inputs, but we also have some cultural inputs, and allow those two things to give what do you call it? Let them speak to each other. Let culture allow us to be ourselves and to reflect, and the internet to get our brains working and to learn more about what's going on in the world. So we'll just begin with a short little spell from Jengen, and then we'll listen to our two speakers. So just have some music to start us. Kick us off.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'll hear more later. We'll hear more later. That's really great. And it is from Sydney and part of our ever-growing Union Chapel family. So, thank you. Okay, so I've introduced Nazek and Shanon. Nazek, first of all, I've known Nazek for a long time. We're of a generation now that probably know each other longer than we dare to admit around the refugee and migrant sector. So it's lovely to have Nazek here. Nazek is the founder and executive director of Migrant Voice, and always impressive piece organisation. And I think your kind of guiding principle is don't speak about us without us. Which is a really important principle for all kinds of areas of social justice issues. And this evening we're looking at voices of change and how we make change generally in society. And so both Nazek and Shanon are people who are in the business of making change, trying to make change. And I'm sure we have a lot to learn from both of them. But first of all, we listen to Nazek, hear how she goes about it and what she's done. I'm sure we'll all be very impressed by the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit some background about Migrant Voice and how we set it up and why and where the idea came from. 13 years ago, in 2010, just before the general election, the debate of migration was a little bit similar to today, where migrants were in the news in a bad way, but the media coverage was much worse. I mean, today the media coverage, I must admit, is much better, but politicians were blaming us for, excuse me, for anything and everything. We were presented as a problem, as something to be managed, to be addressed, an issue. We were presented as one of the top 3 concerns in the country, alongside the NHS and the financial crisis. This was in 2010. Of course, at that time, we were watching the news in horror. I'm also migrant, and all the people I know I work with, we just, don't know what to do. We know what the politicians are saying isn't true, is wrong. We know we contribute a lot to the country. We know we're not a problem. We know we're not a burden. We know, we keep the NHS healthy. We work in agriculture and education at universities. We know that because of our contribution as migrants to the UK did not suffer financially as much as it could have suffered. Actually, we reduced that suffering because. So we knew what we do, and we were really very concerned watching the news. And those people talking about us, and we were not heard. We were not, there was a huge debate about migrants, without migrants. We were not part of that conversation. We were not part of this big debate, and we started to feel the impact of this on the ground. It's not just a debate that passed away. They want to win some votes and dependent to the far right politicians, but really the impact on us, we could feel it as migrants. So, for example, in one of the London boroughs, there were on average 3 to 4 attacks, daily attacks on migrants or people who look like migrants, whether verbal or physical attacks. So we know how people on the street will interpret what the politicians are saying, what the media is reporting. And we thought if you don't challenge it, people think it's going to be true. It's true, must be true. And we have at one meetings, I remember one young lady came to one of our meetings, at another organization, and she said, well, I tell my grandmother what she reads in the press is not accurate, what politicians are saying is not true. And then her grandmother would tell her, it must be true because no one else is challenging it. Again, another example, there was an event, all this around the time when we started my course, was a big event, a conference for the media coverage of the charity sector. It wasn't about migration. But there was one question event conference to the journalists. They said, why are you so critical to migrants? Why do you report the way you report about migrants? And one journalist said, we don't mind actually talking to them and getting their side of the story, but where are they? This was the answer of the journalist. So for us at that time, we decided we have to do something. We just can't sit back and do nothing, because I'm also a mother. I have my children, they go to school, to university, they go to work. I'm concerned about their safety on the street. So many of us at that time, we felt helpless, we need to do something. I mean, I was working for another organization and I raised the issue that, let's do something. But then the conversation in our sector at that time was to keep low profile of migration with the elections and not to say much. This was a decision. So I was not happy with that decision because I was the only migrant there, and I think, okay, it's great, all you great, rich people, you're going to go home, you feel safe, you're not going to be affected, but we are going to, we are going to be impacted, we're going to pay the price for this, and no, we're not going to keep low profile. And this is where the idea of my voice came up. I said, you know what, if we are to change things, it has to come from us, we can't just rely on others. We need to engage in that debate taking place about us, without us. We need to speak up, we need to challenge politicians to say, excuse me, this is not fair, this is wrong, this is not accurate. We need to tell our own stories, and if journalists are happy to talk to us and to listen to our stories, then we must come forward and engage with them. So we saw some opportunities for us to engage, but we decided, you know what, nothing's going to change. It's our life, our future, our families. We must do something, and it must come from us, and we must make that decision. And this is why we as migrants need to set up our own movement, that we decide when we keep a low profile of the issue, and when we speak, we don't speak. It needs to come from us, that we tell our stories, not other people, press officers and other people who come speak, we tell our story. What's wrong with us? We can talk, we can tell our stories. So in order to change things, we need to come forward and engage and chase. And there's one way to find out if this is going to work, is to try it. So we came together as a group of people. We decided we're going to set up a movement called My Voice, because we're going to speak for ourselves now. We will engage. All these stories about us, without us, let's tell the journalists, if you're writing about us, come and talk to us, and we're happy to talk to you to tell you our side of the story. And we set up My Voice, at the first year was like a movement, and we wanted to be national. So although I live in London, I started in London, but we wanted to connect to migrants across the UK. Now this is, remember, pre-Zoom time, so there was no other ways to connect to people. We thought, we need to connect to our migrants and bring them on board, and learn from each other, and talk to each other, and support each other. So we also went to Birmingham and set up a hub there in West Midlands, and we went to Glasgow and also set up a network for migrants in Scotland. Now we were surprised by the amount of support we received. I mean, journalists were so pleased to see us, to hear about us. Wow, amazing! They just come to us, and many of them, they're just not excited that migrants not want to speak. They came to say, can we do anything to help? We had journalists coming into it. We did training for years and years by journalists who said, amazing what you're doing, I'd like to help. What do you want me to do? And we said, come to do training for us. Because of course, when we set up, we're not journalists, we're not experts on media or migration, and we need to understand how the media work. And we need to understand how the public respond, how public attitude works. And we need to learn how to best tell our story and engage. How to build the bridges. After all, we live here, this is our home. And we want to make sure that we live safely in our new home. And we are a member of the community. We need to be accepted as members of the community. And in order to do so, we need to have a voice, have a say, and engage more and be heard in the community. So this is where my group start now. We're a registered charity in England, also a registered charity in Scotland. We have 3 offices. We have a staff team. We have an army of volunteers. We engage with universities, with lots of people. We have hundreds and hundreds of stories in the media. And I'm proud to say we started a trend in our sector. When we set up, there's probably one organization at that time who did some media story, but because they were run by British journalists. We were the first organization, migrant organizations in the UK and probably in Europe, we set up our own, and we started to produce our own newspapers as well, and we did a huge amount of work. It's been a success. We changed, as I said, we set the trend, encouraged other sectors. Now most organizations, almost every organization in the sector have a media department or have a comms person, have live by experience, whatever group you call us. So this is, and the media is telling our stories more and more. And I'm proud to say we have made a lot of change. And we have great relationship with journalists, with media. You see us more on TV, on radio, in papers. You hear more migrant voices, and more migrants no longer feel hopeless and helpless. We have voice and we can speak, and we're equal. We started this, and when we speak to journalists, and we're like, all our meeting like this room, which I'm really pleased to see, is a circle, because in a circle we're all equal, we're all the same, and so the power relation is really important. We do a lot of media training, we do our own research, and we now use in the past few years we start to use the media. Media as our main platform, but we start to use our voices, our media stories, and our own research to lobby the campaign for our rights. And we run a number of campaigns. I guess I need to stop here, and then people might want to ask me questions. Otherwise, I could be talking till the morning. I must warn you. Thank you.
That's a really helpful introduction. I think all of us will have lots to ask about the current situation as well in relationship to migration. It's very topical, and very disconcerting kind of circumstances that we're meeting in. So I think we can hold those and listen to Shanon, and then I'm sure there's just going to be an amazing conversation between us all tonight. But thank you, Nazek. It's a really good introduction. Shanon, we just met tonight, but we heard about you and wanted to engage with you. Shanon is the director of Faith for Climate, and climate justice is a really important consideration of our own community here, but I'm sure there are other wider dimensions of what you're doing. You can tell us, obviously I can tell from Google that you're engaged with lots and lots of things, and your name appears in all kinds of places, so wonderful. And Holly and I went to an event which Shanon had organised on Friday called Critical Muslim, which is a journalism, which is a really impressive event. So thank you for that invitation and that evening, and welcome to Union Chapel. And if you could introduce yourself, say a little bit about the kind of circumstances and situations that you're engaged with, and then we can widen this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bon. And thank you to you and Hardy for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here and really pleased to be speaking alongside Nazek. I checked with Hardy beforehand, and I think I'm going to do it maybe a bit differently, because I thought maybe I have about 15 minutes to yeah. So, and I thought I'd weave in some personal background as well, because I think I want to make this specific to people of faith and how my faith comes into what I do. And as you've said, I wear a few different hats. I have a bit of a portfolio career now. I'm a trained academic sociologist, but I work in the charity sector for different charities. So my work with Faith for the Climate is just one of the projects that I do. The other project is writing for Critical Muslim and editing it. I also do some teaching and research in religious studies. Just to tell you a little bit first about Faith for the Climate, it's a national charity. It's very recently set up. We only properly got going before the pandemic struck. Its aim is to encourage, inspire, and equip people of faith in the UK, any faith, we're not doctrinaire about how we define faith, to take action, any kind of action that they want, on the climate crisis. So that's what we do. And there was a step change in our impact and our visibility and the groups that we worked with in the lead up to the UN climate talks in 2021, COP26, and we definitely raised the profile of faith voices on climate justice especially, which we'll go into later. But that's sort of the kind of professional spiel. Let me go into some of my more personal reflections after receiving this invitation. I mean, initially I was quite afraid to say yes because I looked at the description and it said change maker, and I thought, oh my God, what is a change maker? Am I a change maker? I don't think I am. And I realized that that response came out of a deep insecurity and possibly an imposter syndrome that I have, and constantly feeling like, actually I haven't done enough in my life, I'm not doing enough, I am not enough, and even when I do lots of things, I'm not sure if they work. But then I reflected on it, and I thought, I am the director of a climate charity, climate communications charity. I do work on anti-racism and Islamophobia and LGBTQ equality. So I thought, if you asked me to produce the receipts, I suppose I could tell you about moments when I was part of a change, or that I initiated it and I worked with other people to achieve it. So I decided to overcome that imposter syndrome and say yes, which is why I'm here with you tonight. And that's not just signaling some form of humility on my part. I've thought a bit more about that, and I think that kind of imposter syndrome comes from very structural causes and effects of injustice, and I think some of that Nazek has pointed out in the experiences of migrants in the UK. So to explain that, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So I was born and raised in Malaysia. I am Muslim. My parents are both from immigrant backgrounds in Malaysia. So my father's parents come from the Indian subcontinent, so what is now India and Pakistan. But my father was born in colonial Malaya. My mother was also born in colonial Malaya, but her parents come from China. And they met in what became Malaysia after independence. So they're first generation Malaysians. And because of the laws in Malaysia, my mom had to convert to Islam. But her family remains not Muslim. Most of them are not Muslim. They're Buddhist, Taoist, Christian, Chinese families, that they're very mixed in that way. But because of the laws in Malaysia as well, and these are all relics of British colonialism, Muslims are generally seen as Malay, and I'm classified as an ethnic Malay, even though my ancestry is Indian and Chinese. And I'm also gay. And I never had a word for this when I was growing up. I just knew that I had feelings that I couldn't explain towards, I went to an all-boys school, so feelings that I couldn't explain towards my classmates, and it's only later on in life that I put the pieces together and had a language to describe what it is that I am and what I feel. But growing up in Malaysia in the 1980s, this was a context in which there was quite heavy political authoritarianism, very, very toxic racial politics. So the narrative would be that we are a peaceful country, we're very diverse, but this diversity can only work if all the minorities respect the fact that Malays have special privileges and Islam is the religion of the nation. So if you respect that, fine, there is peace, but if you don't, then there's trouble, right? And there are certain versions of Islam that you have to adhere to, very anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynistic, nationalist, and so on. So in this kind of environment, being who I am, coming from the family that I come from, I think I grew up with perpetual anxiety and fear and shame and guilt. The fear of being found out, of not being a real Muslim, not being a real Malay, of not being a real man in that sense. That's how my brain worked then. So I've spent my life basically faking it so that I would fit in, so that people will accept me and like me. I'm very friendly and warm, and I think that's who I am, that's my personality, but that's also a way to be less threatening. And I also work very hard. I think that is something else that I think a lot of migrants take offense to as well, when people say, oh, you're just scroungers, and actually, because of my parents' background, having to exist and thrive in a new country, actually people have to work really, really hard. So, because of all these factors, and my parents also went to British schools, so I have some privileges as well. So I'm English speaking and middle class. Eventually I got a scholarship by an oil company in Malaysia called Petronas to study chemical engineering in Australia. And everyone thought that was a great idea. I wasn't really keen on it because I was a musician, I wanted to make music. But I thought, okay, go to Australia, maybe things will be better there. There won't be all this political Islam and homophobia and so on. And then when I went to Australia, I found out I was very wrong, so very wrong. I still encountered homophobia in the mosque spaces, but then when I was trying to discover my sexuality as a gay man, and I went out clubbing and in gay social spaces, the racism and Islamophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment that I experienced in those spaces was off the charts as well. So then I realized, right, so the grass is not greener on this side. And then in the late 90s, while I was still at university in Australia, a series of events happened that precipitated a crisis for me. All this while I was still trying to fake it, to make it. But in 1998, Malaysia was part of that group of countries that experienced the political and economic crisis, the financial crisis. And there was political turmoil. Our deputy prime minister at the time was sacked on charges of corruption and sodomy. He's the prime minister now of Malaysia, but we'll save that for later. I don't want to go into that. But he was sacked, and there were convulsions in Malaysia, and a lot of political homophobia emerged then as well. And then at this time, I was trying to research for jobs in the oil and gas industry as an engineer. And I came across stories, because this was the early days of the internet. I came across something that really disturbed me. I learned about Ken Saro-Wiwa in Nigeria, who was a Nigerian environmentalist and human rights activist, who was basically assassinated by the Nigerian military regime with the collusion of Royal Dutch Shah. So this really, I snapped. I basically thought, I want to quit everything. Homophobia in Islam, I want to quit Islam. The oil industry does this to innocent villagers in Nigeria. I want to quit the oil industry. There's all this crap happening in Malaysia. I want to quit Malaysia. But where do I go? If I stay in Australia, it's not that great either, right? And it's during this time as well that I was watching Australian TV, and one night there was this documentary on a group called Sisters in Islam, which is a group of Islamic feminists in Malaysia who are basically looking to uphold gender equality and inclusion within the framework of Islam. And they were so articulate. They were saying things about Islam that I never thought were possible. I had one view of Islam, they blew it out of the water. I thought, okay, that's hope. And in the early days of the internet as well, I discovered websites like Queer Jihad, which was set up by a group of American queer Muslims who talked about navigating a journey to reconcile their spirituality and their sexuality. So all these were really important for me, but I still had to go back to Malaysia because I was on a scholarship, and the terms of the scholarship were that I had to work for this oil company. So I did go back. And then 1 month before I started my job, the 9/11 attacks happened. And that unleashed a whole other set of complications. I won't go into that, that's a bit boring now because we've all talked about that quite a lot in the media and so on. But I'll just pause here to just identify some trends and patterns, because I'm trying to think about what it is to be a change maker, right? And am I a change maker? Are we change makers? I think in my experience, what I've come across is there are these events beyond my control, right? And they all involve violence and injustice in some ways. The injustice and violence of the Malaysian state, of the oil industry, of the military regime, of the settler colonial state in Australia, patriarchal violence, heteronormative violence. That's the context. It's no surprise then that I grew up anxious and fearful and ashamed wherever I am. And that's the internal stuff. And what does that do? That results in the way I am. I fake it. I try and fit in. But then you realize that you do enough of that and you think you're safe. You're not safe. There's always the danger of being found out. we have these narratives, these testimonies from the Holocaust, right, of very assimilated, Germanized Jews who still get gassed because they're found out as having Jewish origins and so on. So then you have a choice. So I thought, what is my choice now? And I think this is when I had an internal struggle. And I thought, well, what do I want? I don't actually want to ditch Islam, because after discovering Sisters in Islam and Queer Jihad, I realized there's so much more that I don't know about this faith that can inspire me. I can't stop being gay. Why should I hate myself for being gay? I don't even want to quit Malaysia because I actually love this country. You know, whatever the politicians are saying about what the status quo should be, it is an amazing, amazing country. So then, let's see. Okay. So then I think this kind of decision on the inside that no one else can see, despite everything else that's happening. So the external injustices and violence still goes on, but I think that was important for me to realize that as isolated as I might feel at the moment, I am not really. I can try and meet these people. So when I went back to Malaysia, I tried to make contact with Sisters in Islam. They were surprised because they were used to Muslim men looking for them to tell them they were wrong. And here was a Muslim man wanting to be a part of whatever it was they were struggling for. I mean, when they found out I was gay, they were like, okay, that explains it. But you know, still, it was cathartic, and I found, you know, musicians and theatre makers and artists in Malaysia, journalists who I really, you know, felt like they were angels, they were mentors in a way. And they showed me a different way of being a man, a gay person, a Muslim, a Malaysian. And so Sisters in Islam runs workshops. I think this is a running thread as well. How do you take control of your own narrative? You have to learn to work with the media. But they also run workshops for people like me who are new to the organization at that time. So in one of those workshops, they introduced something that is so central in the history of Islam, but was never taught to me in school in Malaysia. So I'm a Sunni Muslim, and all my examples are going to be quite Sunni. That's the other privilege that I have as a Muslim. You know, if you talk to a Shia Muslim now, they will have quite different stories about what it means to be a Muslim, because then they experience sort of hostility from Sunni Muslims as well. But anyway, so one of the stories that I came across that really inspired me was, there was, you know, in Christianity and Judaism you have denominations, right? So in Sunni Islam you have schools. I think in Shia Islam you have schools as well, schools of thought. And one of the founders of one of the schools of thought, the Maliki school, Imam Malik, this was in the 8th century. So he was getting really well known for his religious opinions on lots of things. And the Caliph at the time, Al-Mansur, the Abbasid Caliph, really liked his opinions and wanted to make them official doctrine of the Caliphate, of the Abbasid Caliphate. So in fact, making Malik's opinions the state religion. Malik actually said to the Caliph, don't do that, because these are my conclusions based on my experiences and my context. Someone else with different experiences in a different context might have different conclusions, and they're not wrong. And this was the clincher, this was his mic drop. He actually said to the Caliph, diversity of opinion is God's gift to humankind. I'd never heard this till I was in my early 20s, resistance. And this is quite a strong tradition in Islam. I think that's, when I learned these sorts of things, that's what started a domino effect of reclaiming myself and my faith, and realizing that actually I can do things, even if I can't lead certain things because of my fear, I can be part of them and I can support them. So I started supporting campaigns to support refugees and asylum seekers in Malaysia, campaigns for housing rights, HIV and AIDS, and yes, also LGBTQ equality. And eventually I became director of Amnesty International in Malaysia for a while. Now fast forward, I've been in the UK now since 2010. I came here to do an MA because I was a journalist in Malaysia, and because of the frenetic nature of journalism, I thought I needed to go deeper into what I was interested in, which was religion and politics and social change. So I did an MA, I got a scholarship to do an MA at King's College London in religious studies. And then I met my partner. He's also kind of an activist in the Church of England. He's a gay Anglican priest called Giles Goddard. So I met him, and then I became a migrant in the UK as well. So we fell in love, we got together. I decided to do a PhD. My PhD research compared the experiences of gay Muslims in Malaysia and Britain. And I published it as a book. It's very unaffordable, no one has read it, it's £99. It's called The Making of Gays. But universities, they order them for their libraries. But lots of the gay Muslims I met in the UK as well were also refugees and asylum seekers. And now, I think where I am in my life is I'm bringing these different strands together. And so in my work at Faith for the Climate, I'm really interested in looking at climate change through the lens of justice, or injustice, as it were. Because wherever you are in the world, or wherever you are in the UK, it's the people who've done the least to cause climate change that are suffering its worst consequences, while the people who have done the most to cause it are still enjoying, astronomical profits. Think of the fossil fuel industry this year, BP's profits, Shell's profits. And they're not doing anything to help us transition into a more livable world. And what's worse, the people who suffer the most from climate disasters, we can think of different places in the world like Syria or Pakistan and the floods last year, the Horn of Africa, when they decide to leave, when they decide they can't take it any longer and they need to find safe passage to somewhere where they can exist safely, they get turned away. They come in a small boat. They can't even get to where they need to be safely. And even when they come, risking life and limb, they are told you are not welcome. So that's what really drives my work now. And I'm really passionate about it. Again, because of that initial spark with Ken Saro-Wiwa in Nigeria, I think that's always stayed with me, even when I was working with Amnesty International. This connection between environmental justice and human rights, it's always been there. But coming into post as director of this organization, I had imposter syndrome. I thought, I can't do this. What do I know about climate change? I'm just a gay, fake Muslim immigrant. I don't know how to do this. And in the environmental sector, it's even more complicated because often I go into meetings and I'm probably the only person of color in the room. Or there might be one or two now. I mean, it's getting a bit more diverse. But I've learned that there's something about discovering that you have something in you that makes you push. I think what I like about Nazek's story is like, my voice, our voice, we can do this. So I'll just say a few things now to sort of wrap up and leave it to questions. I think being a change maker as a person of faith is about navigating lots of external constraints whilst recognizing your own vulnerabilities as well as your own privileges. And my personal story is one of going from an existence that was defined by shame and fear to one now where I think, I might not be able to change the world, but I can work with people to change one corner of it, and hopefully that will have a ripple effect or a multiplier effect. And I'm actually really heartened that this sort of change is also, this sort of encouragement to change in this way, to grow, is embedded within the DNA of Islam. You know, I talked about Malik before, one of the imams. There's a founder of another school called Shafi'i, who was actually one of Malik's students. And Muslims in Malaysia generally follow the Shafi'i Hanafi school, so lots of us know this story about Shafi'i. No, actually that's not true, because it is quite suppressed as well. So I learned about this through sisters in Islam as well. So Imam Shafi'i was a student of Malik in Mecca or Medina, in Arabia. And then when he went to Baghdad, he became a very strong critic of another school, the Hanafi school. So he defended the Malikis and he criticized the Hanafis. So he became persona non grata in Baghdad. All the Hanafis were like, get out. So he left, he went to Egypt, which was dominated by the Maliki school. But when he went to Egypt, he sort of was disturbed by the blind adherence towards Malik's teachings amongst his followers there. So then he started writing criticisms of Maliki thought. And this guy is like, it's not just that he was criticizing like some troll on the internet. He actually wrote, treatises, and people would go to his house and threaten to kill him. They would beat him up in the street. He was put in jail. But he did it. He was like, no, I have to criticize the Maliki school now. And when people asked him, why have you done this? When you were in Baghdad, you defended the school so much, and now you are its biggest critic. He said, different context, different time, different insights. I've learned new things that changed my mind. Now, this can seem a bit woolly. So I think I'd like to end by thinking about a framework, like what is the framework for being a change maker? I think the context for me is important. When I was in Malaysia, I was trying to fake it by trying to pass off as a good Muslim, a good Malay. When I'm in the UK, the pressure is to pass as a good immigrant. And the two things actually play against each other. What is a good Muslim in Malaysia? A good Muslim in Malaysia is anti-Israel, anti-Western, is homophobic, is patriarchal. A good immigrant in the UK will look at Muslims coming from the Middle East saying, no, they're a threat because they are Muslim and they're potential terrorists. Don't let them come in. If you look at the Muslims in the Conservative Party now, I'm not trying to attack anyone personally, but that is the position of the people of color, right? Who are the people who are trying to really squash immigration now? It's a foreign secretary and whatever she is, Cruella Braverman, and Rishi Sunak. So this is what you have to be, right, as a good immigrant in the UK. And I think I reject that. My conscience says I do not want to be that. I do not want to throw other people under the bus. And again, this is what I get from my faith. There's a very famous tradition of the Prophet Muhammad where one of his companions goes to him and says, I don't know how to figure out what is sin and what is righteousness. And Muhammad looks at him and jabs his heart 3 times and says, ask your heart, ask yourself, ask your heart, ask yourself, ask your heart, ask yourself. And then he closes by saying to this companion, righteousness is that which the heart feels at ease with and the soul is content with, and sin is that which troubles the heart and causes doubts in the chest, even if people pass fatwa of permissibility for you and give you verdicts. Right? And the word fatwa is kind of difficult in a British context because everyone thinks about the Ayatollah's fatwa against Salman Rushdie, which we saw had some really terrible effects last year. But actually a fatwa means a legal opinion. And this tradition in Islam tells us that this legal opinion must be based on your conscience. How do we apply it in the context of the UK now? There are things that are being passed that are entirely legal, like the Public Order Bill and the Policing Crime and Sentencing Act, which are curtailing our democratic right to protest. This turning away of refugees and asylum seekers is perfectly legal. I mean, the UN is shocked by it, but it's still legal. But what does that legality hold in your own heart? And I think finally, again, that might be a bit woolly because you're thinking, what if my heart tells me it's okay to, just turn away refugees? I think those of us who have survived injustice and trauma have lessons to teach each other and the world and to grow into ourselves. And I'll close with this poem by Jalaluddin Rumi, who was a 13th century mystic and poet. And it goes, I said, what about my eyes? He said, keep them on the road. I said, what about my passion? He said, keep it burning. I said, what about my heart? He said, tell me what you hold inside it. I said, pain and sorrow. He said, stay with it. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Say that again, the wound is the place where the light enters you. And maybe this is what it means to be a change maker, to be gentle with our wounds and with the wounds of others, because this is how the light enters all of us.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, thank you so much. I mean, going through my mind is, what Gandhi said, which was, be the change you want to see in the world, and what you've both been talking about is a change in your own consciousness, which then becomes a change in the world. So just by being yourself, you're a change maker. Just by living the life that you and taking the decisions that you make, just personally, you become a change maker. And my guess is just by us being here, just by the very fact that we're here, listening to each other, means we are already making change. This is a different conversation to the one that we would normally have. We have the same conversation within Christianity, which you've been talking about in Islam. But the fact that tonight we're having that conversation together means we've already made a change. That's just my thought. But that's incredible, both of you, thank you so much. But I'm sure we've got more to hear and more to say. And I'm hoping that somebody will help us out. Yeah. Does this just stretch? Yes. Okay, I'll come to you.
Hello, both. I guess my first question is for Shanon. You talk about this idea of, this kind of idea that's put on you on how you should be a good Muslim. And I think a lot of Christians have exactly the same problem. To be a good Christian is to be homophobic, is to be a Zionist, etc. And I guess, like, what I'm wondering is, how do you convince people that to be a good Christian is actually to be a good person? And saying to be a good Muslim is just to be a good person. How do we get out of this rut that the church is in right now? Do you have any ideas?
I think that's really hard because people will read into the scriptures or into the doctrines what they want, and they bring their own experiences to it, and it's very easy to manipulate whatever's in there and to select the bits that suit your view already, right? But I keep thinking about, what I didn't say was, in my own family, life hasn't been great either. Like, my relationship with my dad has completely broken down. He sees it as me abandoning him, but it's just because I've just insisted on not living in the shadows anymore and living with my partner. So he wants to have nothing to do with me anymore. And it's quite painful because I've really made an effort to be the best son that I could possibly be. And this is where I think, things like Matthew's Gospel and Luke's Gospel, where God the Father says, this is my son with whom I am well pleased, and says this to the world. And this is a son who sits and eats with tax collectors, who isn't married, who doesn't have children. This is a son who meets a woman at the well and knows her sexual history and is like, whatevs, I'm okay, right? Who heals lepers. This is the son with whom the Lord is well pleased, right? This is the son that gets crucified because he just will not bow down to an unjust political status quo and an unjust religious status quo as well. And for me, it's like, how can anyone, get into that story and think to be like Jesus, we have to be homophobic? Like, it just doesn't compute. So I don't know. Maybe it's about maybe raising those questions to people, because I think it's really hard if we look at the stories in the Gospels. I think it's extremely difficult to think of Jesus as anti-refugee or homophobic. Or it's like, how on earth is that possible? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just how it works for me.
No, it's super difficult. Thank you. Go back to the Gospels. Wonderful.
Nazek, do you want to say
I mean,
more?
I must admit, I don't know a lot about religion, and I don't deal with religion. I deal with migrants, migration, but my organization provides spaces for people to accept different opinions, and people who have different views and different sexuality and different religion. Because when we come to our space, we say to everyone, this is a safe space for everyone. And here, we put all differences aside. Everyone must respect everyone else, and we need to respect differences. And sometimes we can challenge respectfully. So we create that space. So when we work together, because we're dealing with issues that affect us all as human beings. So we put all the other differences aside, because our focus is on the human, and we're all equal in that space. So we remove all the other conversations out of that space, and the conversation focus on the injustices, or not necessarily all the time, injustices, what bring us together, and how we can, solve our differences, if you want, sometimes by having direct conversations. I think one of the things we have achieved, it's a fact that you only change someone's views when you engage with them, when you're in your room. So people who have negative views of migrants, they never met a migrant. But when people see a migrant and meet them and talk to them, they change, they have different views and opinions of them. So those are the opportunities you provide for people to engage with others from different backgrounds, from culture, different religion, whatever, and then we all become equal. So I am not academic, I can't together with it, because I remove religion and everything else away. We create those spaces, so then it becomes easier for people who actually is difficult for them to accept and say, oh, it can happen actually. I can distance myself. I can't just sit here now as a human being, see everyone equal to me, and talk about things that bring us together. So I think this would be probably my answer for that. I mean, that's what the question was for you, and maybe a bit correct answer. Thank you.
If you want to add any more about anything, Nazek, do so.
Thank you. I'll probably wait for questions and I answer. Thank you.
Yeah. You don't need to stand up, I'll come to you.
I was just thinking there's an awful lot to be angry about, and neither of you seem angry. And I wonder if you are angry, but you find a way of channeling it into something productive, or you have a way of being that actually prevents the anger at how bad things are in the world.
Can I start answering this? Yes, well, I need to be calm to cope. Of course you are angry, and this is what drives you to do something about it, something positive. I mean, I just want to share one example again. Experience, I need to say a lot about my experience, but I have to share this. I've been in the UK for 6 years now, and the first year I came to the UK was the most difficult year, because I didn't speak English then. And I was coming from Lebanon during the wartime, lived there for a long war, in the middle of the war, missing my family, having to leave, it's with all the trauma that war brings. And coming to a new place, I don't know anyone, and I don't know even where my family were. I mean, at that time, we all just went different directions, and I don't know where they are. We found each other after something. But the point is, it was a difficult time. And coming to a place, don't speak the language, don't know the culture. I was so, miserable at that time. It's so vulnerable. It was a difficult time, hardest time. And I faced lots of hostility from people. I wasn't that time I was just feeling sorry for myself and, you know, think about myself. But I started to be surprised that some people actually resented me being present there. And I'm lucky at that time my English wasn't good, so I didn't understand what they were saying, but I could tell they're not happy and they're saying something probably bad. I lived in a part in East London for less than a year, luckily, but not more than that. And I really faced lots of racism and discrimination, and my life became so hard. So, for example, there's one old lady who, every time she saw me, she stopped, you know, angry and speaking. And as I said, you know, luckily I don't know what she's saying. I don't understand English. She was sent to look after me and my children. I mean, you know, I need to take my children to school now. I can't respond to her. I don't know what she's saying. I don't know why she's angry. I don't know she hates me. And at that time, I focused, you know, it's my brain is elsewhere. So I used to take my children along to, you know, to go to school because this was a shortcut to school. I have to walk along to avoid her. And if she sees me in the shop buying food, she also have to go at me. And it was really difficult. She was an older woman. I couldn't, even if I understood what she's saying, I come from a culture that, you know, you respect someone who's older than you. But it really made me very unhappy. And other examples in the area. But one day, and I mean, we couldn't wait to move to West London to buy property. My husband's working, you know, to move elsewhere. Just before we moved, the week before we moved, I was in the shop, outside the shop, and I saw her come to me. I was like froze. I was terrified. Oh my God, what's now? What's next? She came to me and she said to me, please forgive me. And she hugged me. She came to me and hugged me. She said, please forgive me. And she wished me Merry Christmas. This was before Christmas. I mean, this changed the way I see people, and I you know, I think maybe she didn't know me. And maybe now she got to know about me, or someone told her something, or she heard the news something. I mean, this changed me as a person, how I deal with people who actually don't agree with me. And they look like they hate me and they resent me. Because there is a way. You can change people's hearts and minds. And I mean, this really changed the way how I live in the UK and how I work and deal with people, because this was earlier on experience. And when I started working, one of our members at a meeting said she was also facing lots of discrimination by people you don't know, you never met. And she said, how can they hate us so much when they don't even know us? And I said, well, maybe because they don't know us. If they know us, engage with them, they change their mind. So, and this is where the thinking behind Migrant was, is let's engage with people. Let's talk to them, let's tell us who we are, let's tell our own stories. If they see us, they hear us coming from us, this is what changes people. When they see someone talking to them, this is when they change their minds. And that's why it's important to engage with people. Because we were so angry about, you know, when we set it up, we were watching the news, we were concerned, we were so angry. But, I mean, what do? You go and shout, scream. I think we decided, let's channel our anger, let's do something about it. What can we do? This is what the situation, this is what we live in. Are we going to sit back and take it, or are we going to do something about it? Let's do something about it. This was the attitude that we took. But when we started to do something about it, when we came together and mobilized other markets, when we came together to discuss, to speak, to see how can we engage with the public, how can we engage with politicians, how can we engage with the media, how can we tell our stories, how can we change the narrative, how can we change debate, how can we engage in it so it's not as poisonous as it is. Then we discovered lots of people are actually very open to working with us. And lots of people came and engaged with us. And the media was happy to talk to us. Great to listen to us, and we'll train you if you want. Because you want to engage with people, all our meetings and events and training, all of them for migrants, but they're open to anyone. And we always have, you know, rich people actually coming to our events, and we treat them like one of us. We engage with them. And then we saw people actually, you know, coming and feeling like making us, they come to us and they feel like one of us, which make us feel like, you know, we're also one of them, of the community. And we've built that community. So we saw people actually respond. They respond and they become supportive and helpful. And that's why a lot of our volunteers, I mean, we have lots of migrant volunteers, but many of our volunteers are not migrants. And they're so passionate and so supportive, and this, you know, so this helped, you know, it was a positive experience overall. The people who resent us and don't like us are the people we don't know. Those are the people that are concerned. But you know, I think when you try to engage, when you try to speak, people do respond. So in general, people are good. And this is our approach. I mean, we do campaigns to challenge all this. We do speak to the media to challenge this injustice by reminding them who those people they're talking about, by trying to bring that missing voice. So when I do interview and spoke about people in Calais, I say just to remind you who those people are, where they're coming from, which countries they're coming from, who they are as people, and this is their story, this is their experience, and this is changes. I think it's important to do that, and it's important to be calm and because other people are open to working with us and supporting us, and this is the best way forward. Because if you get angry and you lose that. I don't know what's your experience.
I have a lot of anger. I really do. And as I said, I think anger at your own self then becomes shame and guilt and anxiety. But I also have anger about the things that are happening around me that I just think are wrong. And sometimes I don't know what to do with that. But as a person of faith, I think I do look for models of anger within the scriptures as well. I've given enough Muslim examples, but in the Christian scriptures, I mean, I love reading the Psalms because they are angry. In Lent now, we're reading Jeremiah. I mean, he was letting them have it. And Jesus, when he just has his tirade in the temple, that is anger as well. But I think it's interesting about Jesus. He's angry then, but he's not angry when people ask him questions. He's not angry with the woman at the well. He's not even angry in Gethsemane. He's despairing. He says, "Take this cup from me." But then he says, "No, but not my will, but yours be done." And then when he is arrested and one of the disciples cuts the ear off the Roman soldier, he says, "Don't do that." So I think anger is valid and productive, and it is part of our relationship with ourselves and with God. And if you're not angry at an injustice, then something must be wrong. But, as Nazek says, channel it. And I think the other thing we learn from the Gospels is, and don't stoop to the level of your oppressor. Don't cut the ear off that Roman soldier. Don't do that, right? So, yeah. And I think that's what helps me. And therapy, lots and lots of therapy. But
any more? There must be more.
Sorry, and then Catherine. Sorry.
I don't wish to be disagreeable, but I'd like to respectfully disagree on one matter, which is that you were despairing about the state of things and how awful everything is. And I'd like to project a different view, which is, in many respects, things have never been better. There's never been a time in history when minority rights have been so respected, so legally respected, as well as even among the general population. There's never been a time in history when, well, perhaps a few years ago, we live as long as we are now, in this country anyway. There's never been a time in history when sexual rights differentials have been respected legally and I think generally expected, beyond legality, accepted generally in the population. So there are things to be thankful and grateful for, and as a sort of counterpoint to your distress and anger about perceived injustices inside this society by this government, as a counterpoint to that, I do a tiny amount of work with some refugees each week, and I'm conscious they're from Ukraine, and they're here, and their husbands and brothers are dying, fighting an anti-democratic force, and it does mean to say we shouldn't be critical of our own society and government, it seems to me, but there are things to be thankful for and things to be guarded against, which are of a scale that sometimes puts some of these local furies and anxieties into perspective that should be, I think, remembered.
Yeah, before. I just, and we do live in a democratic society, it's just, I fear that we are losing some of these things. You know, the right to protest, the EU retained law bill might take away workers' rights. So it's a sort of anxiety that actually the things that hold us up that we take for granted they might just gradually disappear and we might not notice. But yes, we should be very grateful that we're not living in Russia or Ukraine and, you know.
Or even in the past, in this country.
Yeah, the Mediterranean. We need the right.
I'm going to just disagree very quickly with that because I don't think that's true. I think even in this country for decades and decades there's been this idea that it's a peaceful liberal democracy, but the troubles in Northern Ireland will show you that even within the UK there has been a war and it's threatening to flare up again. And I think a lot of that does happen through, you know, a kind of governance that divides people and makes some experiences invisible. And I think, you know, because I work on climate, I also see how with the system that we have in the UK, there's a lot of greenwashing that happens. I mean, this was the first government in the world to pass the Climate Change Act, yes. But the City of London and the laws of this country also allow for fossil fuel companies to just get away with outsourcing their human rights abuses and their extraction in the rest of the world. I think we can look at what's going on in Mozambique and East Africa with the East Africa crude oil pipeline. I mean, the UK government officially announced that it was ending subsidies for fossil fuels abroad, but that hasn't actually stopped. So I think that's why things have the appearance of getting better in this country. You know, even with the advances that we have made in gender and sexual equality. Today's International Women's Day, and if you look at statistics, young women, even in the UK, are more frightened than ever for their existence. If we think about Sarah Everard and Wayne Couzens, and you know how the police have been negligent in their duties towards women. I'm not saying we should hate the UK. I'm not saying that. I think wherever you are in the world, whether you're Ukrainian or Syrian or Malaysian or American or British, there are things about where you come from to be proud of. There are traditions of justice that you should really hold dear. I mean, this is why I do what I do at Faith for the Climate. I work with faith groups in the UK, I work with church communities, I work with different denominations and religions, and it is an incredibly inspiring experience. But I think that's what we have to remember. It comes with work. It's not handed to us on a platter. We have to work for it. And like what Nazek said, meet people in a room, talk to them. I think that's what we have to do. You know, sometimes the story that's told in the media, there's a free press in this country, but it's also captured by corporate interests, especially the fossil fuel lobby. This is why in some newspapers, we do not actually hear facts about climate and environmental breakdown. And I think this is what climate activists are thinking about as well. How do we get people to actually tell the truth? I think this is why we need a public broadcast. I was just watching a documentary, David Attenborough, the other day, and I was like, thank God for David Attenborough, right? He's telling the truth. But so David Attenborough is something we can be proud of. I think David Attenborough is a national treasure. So yeah, so that's just what I wanted to bring to that question as well.
No, I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. Of course, there are lots of things that are great about this country. This is why we're still here, we live in here. We're trying to fight injustice and try to see where there's an issue, what can we do about it. So this is an even better place and this are more. I don't want to say a lot on this question, but just maybe one short answer. I had a volunteer who came work with me and years ago, and I asked her where she lived, and she was living in the same area where I lived when I came first, when I had this lots of racism, and I asked her, when she said to me, I said, oh my God, I said, how is it like to live there now? She said, oh, it's lovely. It became very diverse, people are friendly. So the time, more than 50 years ago, when I came was different. Was really, I mean, probably I was the only migrant, or was the only one other person in that area. And my experience was so different, really bad. But her experience now is different. So yes, things are, but there are lots of things we can say just to give something positive. And respond. There are lots of things, I mean, the fact that we are sitting here and we can talk about
question for Nazek about what you're saying about the response of media and journalists to hearing the stories. Because my perception of the media is that there are certain stories about refugees that people seem to like more. For instance, if it's stories about people from a certain country or who do certain jobs or their children, and just how have you found it getting out the stories of all refugees and migrants and showing that you don't have to be this stereotype of people who say grateful refugee, but to show all stories?
Well, I mean, this is something we battle with all the time. We've had some weird requests from the media over the years. So I'll give one example. I'm not saying which region, but one even BBC Radio in regions called me once when Bulgaria and Romania were allowed to start coming to the UK. It was a big news story. And the media called to say, oh, do you have anyone who's from Bulgaria and Romania who's happy to speak to us? We can speak to them because now they have more freedom to come to the UK. And I said, yes, of course I do. Yes, and he said, okay, tell me about them. And I said, yeah, we have one Bulgarian member who is an academic, another one who's a housing officer, and we have one Romanian who was a dentist. And he said, oh, very nice, okay. Do you have any Bulgarians and Romanians who do normal jobs? His next question. I said, what do you mean normal jobs? I thought these were normal jobs. What job do you have in mind? I mean, I said, oh, no, I don't mean anything bad. Like, do you know anyone who's like a cleaner or a care worker? I mean, so, and this is something, this is a big someone from BBC, one of the regional radios. And I said, I'm sure there are Romanians workers working, but they're too busy working and they can't come join us and work with us, so we don't have access to them. But we have, I think now if we have a campaign or an issue, then the journalists are happy to come in because they want to cover the story. So now we have a lot of experience and expertise in how the media work and how to pitch the story and how to get it, published. So we know now how to pitch the story idea from the start of the journalist. But we see, again, journalists are, I need something in return from the media. They're human beings and they respond. So once we had a meeting, and I had a journalist who said to me, came and said, I will work on the story. I said, great, we can help you. But can you first, whenever possible, if I have a meeting, and if they need journalists, I'd like them to come to our meeting, sit in the room, be with migrants and listen to them, and at the end present the request, and then people come and support them in their story. And she said, okay, I will come, but I won't make any favor. I don't make you any favors. I said, no, we don't want you to make any favors. All what we want you to do is when you report the story, to report it accurately. We don't want favors. We just want to tell what we tell you, the truth. We don't want to influence how we work. Now, this journalist sent in a room, and at the end of the meeting, before she even suggested her request, because I want the journalists to meet migrants, to sit in a room, to see them as a human being who they are. They're just normal people, ordinary people, and this is their story, and this is what we're discussing. Now, this particular meeting, because every meeting has a different issue, depends on what we want to bring to those meetings. So it was about some who were destitute. We had many people who were destitute, including females, who actually would tell us how they sleep in late at night, to sleep with another sun seeker, and then early in the morning they have to leave before the whatever, and how even some women have to go and leave when man just told they have a bad. I mean, it was really bad. I mean, there's some horrific stories at that meeting. I mean, at the end, before she presented her story and asked people to respond to her, she said, oh, I'm going on holiday. I'm happy to offer my room to anyone who wants to stay for 2 weeks while I'm away. And the journalist offered, I mean, we're still in a good relationship with that journalist, and we got lots of stories. And lots of people respond to her request and, have stories. So, there is, if people sit in a room, they understand. But we also train people, migrants, how to best tell the story, because people don't know how to tell the story and how to, how the British people, I mean, we are poor people, but sometimes you react to the story differently because of the culture, because of our understanding. So there's a lot of work to prepare people. And for example, we say to them, when you tell your stories, if the journalist provoke you or ask you a question which you're angry about, you don't lie, don't get angry at the journalist. And just remember that, remember the people who are going to watch watch you talking, or hear you on radio, or read your story in paper. There are people who may not know anything about migrants and migration, about your story. And this is the first opportunity to address them. How would you address them in order to get them to support? This is what you talk about. So there's a lot of training and preparation, so for people to be calm. And to think, this is what I want to get out of that. So there is a lot of work, and as I said, maybe you have experience in presenting the story, the issue. A positive story, they're not new stories. So we start with positive stories, unless they're like extraordinary, because it's not a new story. I'm afraid in sad stories, stories of justice, stories of whatever, there are stories that journalists are excited about. So this is probably one of the issues that we have. But I mean, so far, we are doing okay.
I mean, it sort of feels like we might need some music very soon, but I don't want to stifle anybody who's desperately wants to say something. I don't want to close it, or somebody bursting to say something.
Hi, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you very much. Because I've been so moved and I haven't been so moved for a very long time. I don't know. I mean, maybe because I'm a migrant myself and from Poland, but I just, the things you were saying, I'm sorry, Jesus. It just resonates so much that I just want to say thank you.
I think Gosha said it all, really. Oh, thank you. Yes, let's move to some music. But this is the second night of these. We had exactly the same experience last week as well. We ended up at a rather similar point, but rather with a different person saying more or less the same thing last week, with the same emotion. And just sitting in the room, listening and hearing people's experience and the depth of the experience, the depth of the thought that goes into it, and the depth of the traditions that you're drawing upon. It does make you feel that change is actually happening without people seeing it and knowing it and realizing it. You know that there's a change that is going on in the world, bubbling away under the surface, out of the media, out of the common view and the prevailing, narratives of the world. That this is our narrative, this is our story, and it's a different story, and it's a really valuable story. It's a lovely story, for years and years and years I've worked in the refugee sector, and the thing that I always hated more than anything else was somebody would say to you, "What do you do?" And I say, "I work in a charity, which what it's for, we work with refugees and migrants." Oh, that must be very difficult. When of course it is absolutely the opposite, because you meet so many amazing people, just so many wonderful, wonderful people, and so this is where we are. We're a circle. People, who are in a struggle, where there are lots and lots of challenges and difficulties and things to make you angry and things to celebrate. But we are together. Now across faith, but actually not across faith, but actually finding faith together, which is a very different thing. So thank you very much indeed, both of you. Thank you all for being part of this circle. It's been a really lovely evening. You ready? Yes. So let's have some music to close out the evening. Thank you.
Dur kırdıçız
before too long, so thank you, thank you. And thank you again to our speakers, to Nazek and Shanon. It's a really, really great evening. Next week we have a speaker from Pastor Roy, who is from Hong Kong, and he organised a group of people of faith to stand between the police in Hong Kong and the young protesters. Very brave action. So he is now here, I think as a refugee. Oh, certainly because he can't be in Hong Kong, at least I did. But he will be coming to speak next week, and there'll be somebody from the Africa Rainbow Group as well, which will be who are working on the situation facing legislation and so on in Uganda and Kenya and other African countries relating to LGBTQ communities. All important issues. And then the other thing I want to plug, the other two things I want to plug are 29th of this month, we're going to show the film King, which is a rarely seen documentary film on like Martin Luther King. It's a long film, but it's fantastic. We've showed it once before here, but we're going to show it here in the bar. And that will be starting at 6:30 because it's quite a long film. But well worth seeing, very powerful film. And then on the 7th of April, Good Friday evening, we have an evening called Fire of Music and Poetry from performers from our own community. So there we are. Everything else, go to our website and see you there. So I hope to see you next week, and thank you all for coming.